To this Tuesday in the Toyota event hosted by the Institute of American Civics, housed here at the Howard H. Baker Jr. School of Public Policy and Public Affairs. I'm Josh Dunn, and I have the honor of being the first executive director of the Institute. I do want to thank President Randy Boyd for being here, and Governors Phil Bredesen and Bill Haslam for also joining us this evening. This event is part of Constitution Week, where we commemorate the signing of the U.S. Constitution in Philadelphia on September 17, 1787. The success of a constitutional republic like ours depends on having an informed and engaged citizenry. We are working towards this by creating programs that inspire civic engagement, build civic skills and virtues, and deepen civic knowledge. It's a privilege to be part of the Baker School and the Institute as we work to restore faith in America's institutions. Chancellor Donde Plowman was a monumental supporter of the founding of the Institute, showing the importance of its mission herself by teaching one of our first classes this past spring, Leading with Courage, with former Governor Bill Haslam. We are very fortunate to have such a decisive leader and consensus builder in support of the Institute. Please help me in welcoming Chancellor Plowman.
What a great night this is. What a great night. I just screwed it up for you, Danielle. Okay, we're all good. Thank you all for being here. This isn't the first event of the Institute, but it feels like it. So thank you so much for being here. And welcome to, listen to the sound of this, the Baker School of Public Policy and Public Affairs. Our leader, Dean Marianne Wanamaker, is here on the front row. This has been a journey, and this is the first of so many events like this that we will be hosting under Josh's leadership in the Institute and Marianne's leadership in the school. And we're excited about all the things that have already happened. But I'm here to talk to you about our speaker tonight. We are so pleased to have Dr. Danielle Allen with us today, and she's going to give us the lecture on the Declaration of Independence today, a really important thing for us all to think about. Now, many of you know that Dr. Allen serves on the Board of Fellows of the UT Institute of American Civics, the institute that Josh is now running. We met today. We had a great meeting. Some of my colleagues are here. Thank you, Ambassador Culverhouse, for your role with that, leading us. Keeping this group in line is kind of hard with John Meacham and Bill Haslam and Bill Bredesen and then Daniel. And we had a lot of fun, let me put it that way. But I've gotten to know, seriously, Dr. Allen over the last few months, beginning with some Zoom calls where when we asked you, would you help us? And you said yes. Dr. Wanamaker and I afterwards were high-fiving all over the place. And we're really thrilled about that. So let me just say a few things about who she is. Dr. Allen is the James Bryant Conant University Professor and Director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University. Her work is focused on an array of topics such as political philosophy, ethics, and public policy. She's also a contributing columnist for the Washington Post and an author of several books such as Justice by Means of Democracy and Our Declaration. In 2020, she was the recipient of the Library of Congress Klug Prize for her internationally recognized political theory scholarship and commitment to improving democratic practice and civics education. Thank you, Danielle, for sharing your time and expertise with us this evening. We all look forward to hearing your insights as we celebrate Constitution Week together. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Danielle Allen.
Good evening. It is wonderful to see you all here. I think maybe I had better stand behind this because if I walk around in front of it, I'll step on Marianne's toes. So, or shall I, is this okay if I walk around a little bit in front of it? Okay, great, fantastic. It is such an honor to be here with all of you. Chancellor, thank you so much for the very kind introduction. President Boyd, where did you go? thank you so much for your leadership as well for the work of the Institute, and Dean Wanamaker and Professor Dunn, Director Dunn. It's a real pleasure as well as honor to be able to be here to do this work with you. So I want to just let everybody else know that the Institute for American Civics, it's where it's at, people, okay? There's stuff happening here. Let this not be the only time you come out to an Institute event. Big things are going to happen here. The University of Tennessee is going to lead the country in terms of embodying what it means to bring democracy back into reality in our daily lives, for young people to practice, for all of us to feel reconnected to our civic experience. So be part of it. It's important work. Now, it's Constitution Week, which is a terrific occasion and really a special one. And my job tonight is to re-gift the Declaration of Independence to you. I consider it a great treasure, and I'm going to share with you why that's the case over the course of my remarks. But many will feel skeptical about that, or if people don't feel skeptical, you may feel that you're not really sure how to communicate to others who are skeptical why you do value or treasure the Declaration of Independence. So I hope to speak to all of those feelings that we have about the text. But first, let me just share a little bit about who I am, so that you know who's speaking to you tonight, who is seeking to re-gift the Declaration of Independence to you. You heard about my work. I am a professor and democracy advocate. When folks ask me these days what I work on, I always give the same answer, just democracy, past, present, and future thereof, and no question mark on the end of that, all right? No question mark about that future of democracy. And I come by that commitment and focus on democracy super honestly. It is a matter of my basic family inheritance. So on my dad's side, my granddad helped found one of the first NAACP chapters in Northern Florida in the 40s. And you all know, sitting here in Tennessee, how hard that work was and how dangerous that time was in the 40s. He was taking his life into his hands. And on my mother's side, my great-grandparents helped fight for women's right to vote. My great-granddad marched with suffragettes on Boston Common in 1917, and my great-grandmother ended up as president of the League of Women Voters in Michigan in the 30s. So I come from people who understood, believed fiercely that empowerment for people is the bedrock for human thriving and well-being. And empowerment requires democracy. So they were committed, and they were also people who were often told something was impossible. My granddad was told social equality for African Americans in the South is impossible. My great-grandparents were told women having the right to vote is impossible. And their answer was no. Not only are these things possible, they're necessary. So the only question is how. So I grew up in a universe of super civically engaged people, and they were engaged across the political spectrum. So this is the other thing I really like to share. There was this one amazing year in my youth when I had two members of my family running for office at the same time. My aunt was on the ballot in the Bay Area in California for Congress for the Peace and Freedom Party. Over here on the political spectrum, okay? That's your left, that's your left side of the political spectrum. My dad, at the very same time, was running for US Senate from Southern California as a Reagan Republican. So we had amazing dinner table conversations, holiday dinners. And I was trying to figure it out, they were back and forth, but they would debate. Oh, they would go at it. I was trying to figure out, how to think about this. Two people that I loved and respected utterly, both of them. And as I watched them, I came to understand a couple of things. They actually shared a purpose. They were both committed to that project of empowerment. That question of what it means to empower individuals, families, and communities to steer their own lives in private and to steer together in public. And they saw that, again, as the path to well-being. They shared that commitment. But did they argue about how to achieve that? So my dad is sort of skinny, professorial, always smoking a pipe, pipe smoke curling around his head. My aunt was a big woman, built like a Mack truck. She was gay. She had this huge belly laugh. My dad would make the case for market liberties and civic virtues. And my aunt would make the case for public sector investment across all segments of society and experiments in living. I was trying to figure out how to make sense of it. And again, that shared commitment, though, to empowerment. And then the second thing I realized watching them as they debated, they were always debating the ideas. They never fought each other as people. They always had each other's back. I was always clear on that. Their love for each other was unbreakable, and they did always have each other's back in life circumstances, despite the intensity of their disagreement. So that was my school of democracy, the idea that we can have a common purpose, that commitment to empowerment that comes from being free and equal citizens in a self-governing free society. We can debate mightily how to make that real in our lives. And we always hold sacred the dignity of the human being in front of us while we're having those debates. So I will admit, as a kid with that school of democracy, I took the value of democracy for granted as a young person. And it wasn't until I was coming up in the world that I came to see democracy as a much more complicated question. As I watched my own generation come up in the world, I realized we were living through something that I call the great pulling apart. My parents' generation had all come up in the world. That same granddad was a fisherman. His kids were small business owners and professors. On the other side, it was from factory workers to accountants. But in my generation, here I am, 10-year faculty member at Harvard, getting to fly, partway across the country in the middle of the week to talk with all of you. That is an incredible privilege. Like, forget Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. I am sorry, tenured faculty member is where it's at. Okay? I know that. Like, I'm so fortunate. I've got a brother who's a corporate executive. But at the same time, I have cousins, people I grew up with, so my age mates, people who are my playmates, who are not with us any longer. And for all of the hardest things that we struggle with in this country, substance use disorder, incarceration, homicide. And when I lost my youngest cousin, Michael, in 2009, I was like, hang on, this democracy thing, it's not just supposed to be abstractly good. I mean, yes, we love these abstract ideals of freedom and equality, but isn't it that we embrace these in order to have the kind of society where the protections of those freedoms, that respect for human dignity, the equality attached to that, give us a society where every generation is able to do a bit better than the generation before? So I was like, something's gone wrong. And I started asking myself the question, how do we change the dynamics in this democracy to try to make a difference here? And that work is what has led me broadly into the work of democracy renovation that is the focus of my efforts. But alongside that work, and this is where we come to the Declaration of Independence, all right? Alongside that work, I was always trying to figure out also how to help my cousins. As cousin on duty when Michael got out of prison, for example, trying to help with reentry while he was inside, did a huge amount of trying to help him get education inside the prison. It was a time in California where punishment was at its most intense, so couldn't get books in, couldn't get schooling, etc., trying to get around all of that. And so while I was doing that, struggling so hard to try to get education to him inside, I was also teaching at the University of Chicago. Another colleague has been at the University of Chicago. And at the University of Chicago, I realized I loved my University of Chicago students. They were amazing. But they were only part of the students who really needed access to the kind of education Chicago had. And so I found an opportunity to help build a night class for low-income adults. And I was drawn to this opportunity precisely because the low-income adults were struggling to put their lives back together again. They were kind of like my cousin. And here I was struggling to get resources to my cousin, and here was another community of desiring learners who were struggling to have access to what I was giving away every day on my university campus. So I signed up, said, absolutely, I want to teach in that course. And The goal was to give night students, sometimes they didn't have even a high school degree completed, the goal was to give them the same quality of education that we were delivering on our college campus at the University of Chicago. So that's a bit of a puzzle. How precisely do you do that? Alrighty? Because of course, kids on college campuses have finished high school, they've done all kind of work. The answer was, we wouldn't compromise at all on the quality of the materials we were teaching, the quality of the texts we were offering, the discussions we were having, but we would compromise on length. We would be okay with short readings. And guess what? The Declaration of Independence is 1,337 words. It was the perfect short reading. That's why I picked it. Because it was short. I'm not kidding. All right? So I picked it to teach in history, to teach in philosophy, to teach in writing, because it was a sort of 5-subject program in the humanities. And it lit my classrooms up. I was like, what is going on here? What is this text doing? And I was stunned because it honestly wasn't lighting up the classroom on my University of Chicago campus in the same way it was lighting up the classroom for my night students. I was like, oh, okay. These students get it. These students get it. They went straight to the kernel of the text. The kernel of the text is this: I have looked around the world, and life is not going well for me or my community. And I'm going to say that out loud to some other people, and I am going to change it. And articulating some key values about how to live life, I'm going to adhere to those values to change my life and work with my community to change my life. Every single one of those night students was in class because they had diagnosed the course of events in their universe, found it wanting, and decided to make a change. That's the basic story of the Declaration, the basic story of civic agency, the basic story of empowerment. So those students gave the Declaration back to me, to see it in all of its force for what it invites us to, by way of understanding our own capacity and our own responsibility. So now, having shared with you the story of how the Declaration was regifted to me, I want to go ahead and regift it to you, okay? Now, before we get to the text itself and some little bits that we'll think about, there are a couple other things that need to be said. Very often, if somebody tries to make the case that we should take the Declaration seriously, that each and every one of us in this country can grab hold of it and learn from it and think about our civic roles, powers, and responsibilities in relationship to it, you'll very quickly hear, but wasn't it written by a slave owner? Doesn't that mean we should chuck it? All right, so there, I've got another secret for you. Okay, this one I published about, so it's not quite as secret, but here's the thing. If you want credit for something, whole single credit, put it on your tombstone. Thomas Jefferson, author, Declaration of Independence. That's why we think he's the sole author. That's not actually what happened. There was a committee of 5 people: John Adams, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston. Who was the actual motive force behind getting to the moment of the Declaration in the Continental Congress that year? John Adams, not Tom Jefferson. Jefferson, he was a kid. He was really young, okay? John Adams, Massachusetts, Lee from Virginia, Richard Henry Lee, had been driving politics all year to get to the point of declaring independence. Adams had been consistently riding along the themes that are in the Declaration of Independence. But Adams and Lee were really busy. They were on like every single committee in Congress. Jefferson, new kid, not on a lot of committees, writes pretty well. Adams worked really hard to get Jefferson elected to the chair of the committee that was going to draft the Declaration. But it was a committee that did that drafting. They worked on it together, all 5. Jefferson did a draft based on their conversations. Adams and Franklin did significant edits. They submitted it to Congress. Congress edited it again, cut out 25%, voted on it, and there you get the thing. Democratic act of writing. It takes many people, not one person. There are many things we can say about Jefferson, some good, some bad. he really did like to take credit for things, all right? Okay? It's a bigger story. It's not just about Jefferson. So that's the first and most important thing. What do we know about John Adams? Never enslaved anybody. Always thought enslavement was wrong. Used the language of the Declaration for the Massachusetts State Constitution, which was drafted before the end of the Revolution and which became the basis for ending enslavement in Massachusetts before the Revolution was over. The Declaration has more than one voice in it. Yes, Jefferson's voice is in it, but so is Adams's voice. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But the point is just that you've got to take the Declaration to see in it the debate and the fact that there were abolitionist and anti-slavery views articulated in and through it, even at that time in 1776. All right? Now, people will also say, well, what about women? Where are women in the Declaration? And there's a lot more that we can talk about here. I'm only going to say a little bit right for this moment, but please do feel free to ask me more in the question section. The most important question is, does the phrase, all men are created equal, apply to males or to human beings? There is a very straightforward answer to that question, which is in the draft itself that the Committee of Five submitted to Congress. In the draft that the committee submitted to Congress, there is a long paragraph in which they condemn King George for perpetuating the slave trade. And in condemning King George for perpetuating the slave trade, they criticize this for violating the sacred rights of life and liberty of a distant people in Africa, and they object to auctions where men, put in all caps, in the handwriting, all caps, are bought and sold. Now, I think we all know that in auctions, slave auctions, it is not the case that only men were sold, only males. We know that women were sold and children. So we know that they were using that word men, as was often the case in the 18th century, in a universalizing way to mean human beings. We may object to that usage. We may not think we want the word men to substitute for human beings, but that is how it was being used in that document. So when the phrase all men are created equal is written, it is actually making a universalizing claim. And again, ask me more questions about that in the Q&A, because there's more to be said about that and more sort of evidence for why we should read it that way. So having said that, now let me turn to the most important part of the Declaration, the part which is your true gift, which you can take and hold on to and carry around with you. I've been carrying it around for 23 years, learning from it constantly. The second sentence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now you can tell the truth. How many people remembered it was that long? That's the whole sentence. There's a long story about why we forget that that's one sentence, but it is. It's what philosophers call a syllogism, a couple of propositions that lead to a self-evident conclusion. That's what self-evidence means, that the conclusion follows from the propositions. Proposition 1, folks are equal in having a set of rights. Proposition 2, oh, by the way, those were just examples, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's not a complete list. Examples, that means think for yourselves, people, about what else goes on the list, okay, because those are just examples. So proposition 1, we're equal in having some rights. I've got some examples. Proposition 2, governments are instituted to secure those rights. Then there's a missing proposition. You have a right to the things that help you secure the things you have a right to. You can see why they didn't write that one out. Conclusion, if the government's not securing your rights, you have the right to change it, okay, to alter it. So that's where we get to the work of citizenship. That last clause of that second sentence is, from my point of view, the most important clause. So rather the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, and then this part, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. The Declaration was the principles, all right, that people have these rights, that we're going to use popular sovereignty to secure those rights. That's the foundation of principle that they articulated. The question of how you organize the powers of government is the question of the legal instrument for using power. First, it was the Articles of Confederation, then the Constitution. So that's how this is a Constitution Week talk, okay? That second sentence of the Declaration of Independence lays out the job of the Constitution, is to organize the powers of government to secure the rights in alignment with that foundation of principles that the Declaration is articulating. Now, I want to say one other thing about this sentence, which is, as I said, it's your gift. I want you to leave this talk and go reread it and consider carrying it around and ruminating on it over time. But there's a few other gifts, because I've just said, so the hard job of citizenship is to figure out what foundation of principle to make the basis for our political conversation together, and then to figure out how to organize the powers of government. And that's what we're doing all the time. When we have debates with each other in the public sphere, we're debating our core principles, hopefully coming back like my dad and aunt to some agreement about that shared purpose, that project of empowerment. And then we're going to debate the how. How exactly do we organize the powers of government to deliver on those principles? But the other lesson in the Declaration is a lesson about compromise. So this is what I want to bring us to conclusion with, okay? No democracy can survive without compromise. The whole point of democracy is so that a bunch of people who don't agree with each other can try to nonetheless make decisions together. That means somebody's always going to be a bit upset with an outcome. It means if you're going to minimize that degree of upsetness, you're going to have to work your way to some compromises by definition. We struggle with that, the idea of compromise being good, because we learn in lots of ways how compromise is bad. We learn all about the great compromises around slavery that led to the Civil War. It looks like a really bad thing, compromise. So I want to share with you two compromises that are in the Declaration of Independence that were part of the process, one of which I consider a good compromise, one of which I consider a bad compromise. I'll say why I see the one as good and one as bad, and then leave you with something to think about how to develop the art of compromise in your own life, how to pursue good compromises while avoiding bad compromises. So first, the good compromise. There's a compromise about religion in the Declaration of Independence. Those words created, there's other words, divine judge, supreme providence, supreme judge, divine providence, sorry, I mixed that up, supreme judge, divine providence. Those words were not in the original draft written by Jefferson. And they weren't even all in the draft that went to Congress. So both supreme judge and divine providence were added in by Congress after the Committee of Five had drafted the text the rest of the way. When they added those words in, you'll notice that none of the words for God in the Declaration, the phrase law of nature and nature's God, none of those words capture any specific theological type. No specific religion, no specific doctrinal position. In addition, you do have phrases like law of nature and nature's God, which are kind of belt and suspenders approach to what our moral foundations are. If you don't believe in God's, well, the law of nature will serve as your moral foundation. And if you're a person of faith, then nature's God is the bedrock for the moral foundation of the document. The point is, they worked really hard to craft language about religion, to draw on religious language and the language of a secular set of commitments, so as to include the perspectives of everybody then in the colonies. There were lots of Christians in the colonies, there were also deists, there were also atheists, there were Jewish people in the colonies, there were Muslims in the colonies, all right? And all of those religious points of view are encapsulated under that language. So it was a compromise that took everybody into account. The other compromise is around slavery. So here's where we get to the harder one, and from my point of view, the bad one. So I described already the passage condemning the slave trade, right? So that got cut out by Congress. That was a pro-slavery moment where that explicit critique of King George, the endorsement of the notion that there were sacred rights of life and liberty for distant people in Africa was more than Congress was willing to support. That got cut out. But on the other side of the balance was the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That phrase was an anti-slavery phrase. By July of 1776, the word property had gotten to be very complicated. In previous eras, when people talked about rights, they tended to use the phrase life, liberty, and property for their basic description of the rights that should be protected. But in the fall of 1775, the British Royal Governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, had issued a proclamation saying that any slave who left a plantation to fight for the British would then be free. And the Virginians objected to that as a violation of their rights of property. And so from the fall of 1775, the defense of rights of property were tightly connected to the defense of slavery. John Adams from Massachusetts, was the person who all year long was talking about happiness. He wrote a pamphlet in April saying, the ends of government, like the end of man, is happiness, and trying to explain how that could make sense as an idea that you could organize governance around. So life, liberty, and happiness was a concept that pushed aside any defense of slavery in that opening section of the Declaration. That was an abolitionist moment, an anti-enslavement moment in the Declaration. So you had both sides leaving their marks on the text. Now, why do I say that's a bad compromise? Mainly because not everybody who was affected by this decision was included in thinking about it and getting to the result. Obviously, people who were enslaved were not included in that result. So that, I would say, is the difference between a good compromise and a bad compromise. A good compromise is one that really does try to understand everybody who is affected and find a solution that does take into account all of those perspectives. A bad compromise is one that leaves aside some people who are affected by whatever decision is being made and doesn't pull them into the process. All right. I'm sure you have many questions about the Declaration and its role in our present times, but I hope what I've done for you is show you that it does have real treasure in it for thinking about our role as citizens. I hope I've also given you some resources for opening up conversations about the Declaration and who it belongs to in our country. So let me just leave you to conclude with that second sentence once again, so you can take it away as your gift, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government, laying its foundation on such principle and organizing its powers in such form as to them, to us, shall seem most likely to affect our safety and happiness. Thank you.
So we do have time for questions. I believe we have some microphones that we would like you, so that those who are joining in on the web can hear the questions. And so just raise your hands and make their way to you.
And don't be shy. I mean, you can really ask me absolutely anything. You can say, that thing you just said was so crazy. Or you can say, I didn't understand that, so can you please say more? Because I did a lot real fast, and I talk kind of fast. So.
Thank you, Danielle. Unfortunately, and you talked about kind of compromise as being almost the subtext of the Constitution Declaration. That's become a bad word today. So in your quest to improve our democracy, what do you tell people to get them past this idea that compromise means you're mushy?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you very much, Governor. I appreciate that. So I guess the truth of the matter is I tend to do most of my encouraging of people to compromise in practical contexts where we're actually working on something together. So I don't tend to try to convert people to the concept abstractly. And what I do, and I'll give you a concrete example in a second, is I try to start a common project of some sort, always by having a conversation about the values. What are the core values we're trying to pursue, that foundation and principle? And I will say, we're going to come to points where, although we've agreed on these values, we're going to really disagree on the how. And when we get to those moments, we're going to stop and take the time to figure out why we can't hear each other's side, try to hear each other's side, and see if we can find another solution. And the reason this will keep us, we're not being mushy, is because we will always keep our eye on those shared values that we articulated up front. So what we'll actually be doing is finding a better path to our shared values, not being mushy. I don't know. Does it convince you? I mean, you've got deep experience in this work, so you should bring the practitioner's expertise to the table. Anything you want to share on the subject of making compromises?
I think the reality is anything hard by its nature is complex.
Yep.
The answer is not as simple as it first. The answer is not as simple as it first appears, but convincing people on either side of that it's not that simple and that there's some nuance to it is difficult.
Exactly. I'll just give you one concrete example. I do a lot of work on civic education, as you heard, and one project that I did has led to something called the Educating for American Democracy Roadmap. I shouldn't say I, because it was a big network of us, ultimately 300 people. We worked to build a big cross-ideological network to answer the question of what is excellence in history and civics learning. And when we got started, we started by trying to articulate some values. And we said out loud to ourselves, we're going to hit disagreements and we're going to stop when we do, and we won't go forward until we come up with a compromise. And it didn't take long. I think we were, the first initial group of us were about 2 weeks into our work when we hit our first disagreement. It was actually part of the values conversation. We were trying to figure out, were we educating people for a democracy or a republic? You've heard this debate. And we're going like this. Got to stop. Just take time out. We're just going to work this one through till we get to a solution that we can all live with. We were using that high bar, the high standard of actually getting to full consensus. And what we came to realize when we stopped to actually hear each other, that's the first step, was that the folks who were advocating for educating for a republic were really focused on concepts of the Constitution, rule of law, structure, and order. And the people who were focused on the concept of democracy were really focused on universal inclusion, popular sovereignty, participation. And we said, well, you know what? Those are actually all, we can agree that those are all good things, that we do actually support that full set. So what if we try saying that we are educating for constitutional democracy? So that's what we ended up doing. In the report, sometimes it uses a spare democracy, sometimes it uses a spare republic, but for the most part, it talks about educating for constitutional democracy. And so we all had to move a little bit in order to start using that phrase.
Hi, my name is Lily Bell, and I'm a freshman here at UT. My question is, what is the best thing my generation, Generation Z, can do as the future of America to preserve democracy and the essence of the Declaration of Independence? Thank you.
Thank you, Lily Bell. Thank you very much for being here, and welcome to campus and welcome to college. That's terrific. And I'm not going to answer your question for you. No, I'm really not. And the reason I'm not going to is because I know who the best person is to answer that question, and that's you. Alrighty? So that's your assignment. I'm serious, I'm not kidding. I'm actually not kidding. I'm going to give you my email address, and I'd love to hear your answer to that question. All right? Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Allen. My name is Annery Darby. I'm a senior here at UT. Maybe you can answer this version of that question.
Oh, man. Just what I thought. I was going to get away with it.
I really liked what you said when you were referencing your family at the beginning about debating ideas rather than fighting against a person, which I think is also a huge concern for our generation, is politics moving away from that. In your opinion, and maybe through the ideals of this text, how do you think we get back to doing that as people as a whole, or as debaters in society as a whole?
Great. No, thank you very much. All right, I will try to answer your combined questions, but I still want both of you. You'll get my email address too. So, I mean, there isn't a single simple answer, okay? But you are both headed in the right direction. You've definitely got the right foundations. So you are taking responsibility, okay? That's awesome. That's where it starts. And you are asking the question about the kinds of relationships we have with each other. That is also fundamental. We need both of those things. So we have to take responsibility for the quality of our relationships with each other. That means if you're working on any kind of political project, find somebody on the other side and find the time to make a relationship. Hear them, understand where they're coming from before you get back into the business of fighting or whatever else it is you're going to do. Now, both of these things, the taking responsibility and the building relationships, also relate to what I think is our biggest shared task right now. And this is not just a task for your generation. You're not alone, okay? Like, hold us responsible. Don't let us off the hook, okay? And the thing that we all need to be doing together, in my view, is building what I call, this is kind of a mouthful, cross-ideological supermajority for constitutional democracy, okay? What do I mean by that exactly? A couple of different ways of getting at it. One of the data points that most keeps me up at night is the data point that shows a decline in connection of Americans across generations to our democracy. So for folks born before World War II, roughly 70% consider it essential to live in a democracy. For folks for 40 and younger, it's not quite 30% who consider it essential. It's very basic. Can't have a democracy if people don't want it. So we have the job of reverting, changing back, getting back to that place where there's supermajority levels of support for democracy. Since that high watermark was about 70%, that means you can't get to everybody. That's pretty much, we probably can't ever have like unanimous full support for constitutional democracy, but we need a supermajority. That means over 2/3. You need that for stability if you're a democracy. And to get anything over 2/3 in any big society means you gotta be cross-ideological. Like, there's no other way to do it. You can't do it in a bare partisan way. You just can't. So that's our job. We, the people, need to build a supermajority, cross-ideological supermajority for constitutional democracy. That really means that right now, one of our most fundamental jobs is to form relationships with people who disagree with us.
Hi, my name is Rob Lundgren. I am not a freshman at UT.
Aww. But you were last year, right?
I can't remember. Josh was kind enough to send me an article written by the Chancellor of Vanderbilt. And are you the Chancellor of Vanderbilt? Oh, well, how about that?
Shall I give him the mic?
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well,
We'll get a double answer here.
well, okay.
He'll answer, then I'll make fun of him. How's that?
So the interesting thing was he called it moral tribalism, which is your left versus right, and nobody capable of talking. They're creating their own tribes. But what was kind of the shocking statement was universities are the last best place for people, students, to learn how to do this in their lives. And as a non-academic, I sit there and go, and everything I see on what's going on campuses, not UT, but what I see not going on campuses, I'm going, they're not giving kids the opportunity to have these kinds of conversations and do what you've been talking about doing. So I'm just curious, the last best place, how are universities doing with that? And I loved your article, by the way. So,
let me start by sharing some good news that we were talking about in our board meeting earlier today, which is that the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and the whole system, as I understand it, actually does extremely well compared to other campuses in terms of making space for students to feel that they can express their views, have debates, and really do this work of civic engagement. So when I started my remarks, I said, this institute is really important, and Tennessee has a leadership opportunity. It's for that reason that this campus is already well positioned to show people again that these campuses are where this kind of work can happen. And I think this institute has the mission of building on that potential. But Chancellor?
Am I messing it up? No, good. Well, thank you for your comment. And one thing I wanted to add to that is why I think, which kind of triggered that a little bit for us. When you look at Vanderbilt's original founding, it was founded by Cornelius Vanderbilt 150 years ago. So this is our sesquicentennial, 105th anniversary. But in the founding document, he says that he is providing this gift to create the great university of the South for a divided nation to come together. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit because, of course, this was a different time, a different type of division. But what I found particularly remarkable was the concept that it is the universities whose role it is, or place where a divided country can come together, because we, more than any other place, we're committed to discourse, discussion, the place where the better argument can win, consensus. All the values that you've talked about, they need to be exemplified in a university context. And it was striking for me to see this from the very first moment when Vanderbilt was created, and we're trying to live up to that tradition today.
Thank you. That was really a beautiful addition. And it reminds me that Vanderbilt, in that spirit, was also echoing George Washington. George Washington wanted to found a national university, and his purpose in so doing was so that the country could come together. That was the same concept, that you would have students in his conception from every state. That meant bringing all kinds of disagreement into one place and then forging a shared civic culture in that context.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, for your excellent talk. I'm wondering if you could speak more to how you see the relationship between the Declaration and the Constitution. You talked a bit about the Declaration being, if I may say so in my own words, kind of the ends, and the Constitution being the means. If you could elaborate on that a bit.
Sure,
Thank you.
no, thank you. Absolutely, that was a terrific paraphrase, so I appreciate that. So, you know, you can probably tell I love this country, I love democracy, I love this history, I love the history of the revolution. I love the nitty-gritty of how they did the work of establishing a constitutional democracy. And it was real nitty-gritty. So, for example, John Adams, in February of 1776, had a to-do list, okay? And his to-do list had a bunch of things, you know, that needed to happen in Congress, you know, munitions supply and stuff like that. And then, you know, there was about 11th out of 13, I don't remember the exact number, declare independency. I was like, milk, cheese, ham, declare independency, okay? And then, you know, Articles of Confederation, treaties with France and Spain. All right, that was the to-do list. So then what you get in the Declaration, you get that to-do list converted into a shared to-do list. Because again, it's that two-part job, the foundation of principle and the organizing the powers. And on, I think it's June 7th, when Lee first moved the resolution for independence, they set up 3 committees. One, to draft a preamble for the resolution of independence. That preamble was that statement of principles, that's the Declaration. Second committee, to draft treaties with France and Spain. Third committee, to draft the Articles of Confederation. Okay, so in other words, when I tell you that that Declaration is naming the 2 jobs, like the foundation of principles and then the organizing the powers, that's exactly what they then turned around to do with the committees that they set up, all right? But then fast forward to the period of the Constitutional Convention, 1787, you get James Wilson standing up in the convention, reading out that same second sentence in full that I just cited or recited to you, and saying, this is the basis of what we are doing. Then in the Committee on Detail, you get the committee saying, do we need a new statement of principles? Or is this just about the instrument for organizing the powers of government? Like, what are we actually doing here in this Constitutional Convention? And the Committee on Detail decides, no, we don't need a new statement of principle. We've got that. So our job is just to reorganize the powers of government. This Constitution is an article for doing that. So that's what they do. And then the last piece I'll give you on that, because this is important on the subject of compromise as well. One of my great teachers accidentally in compromise is Benjamin Franklin. And he is my teacher in this because I served on a commission that produced a report with some recommendations for how we could improve our democracy. And one of my co-chairs on that was always quoting Franklin. So I think of him, Stephen Hines is his name, as our Benjamin Franklin. And he would quote Franklin on the last day of the Constitutional Convention, who stood up and said, roughly, this thing's not perfect, but I don't think we can do any better. And so I'm going to bury my reservations, and I think everybody else here should also bury their reservations, and we need to sign this thing unanimously, because this thing needs our unanimous support, and we need to go out there and defend it and not tell anybody what our reservations were. And so for our commission, which was this bipartisan commission, lots of disagreement, we set ourselves to that standard. Could we get unanimous support for our 31 recommendations? The report is called Our Common Purpose. And we did. And so I found that as a chair that I had to go around the world defending this report when I didn't agree with all 31 of the recommendations. Okay, yes, I had voted for them, compromise. And the crazy thing is, as I began to defend these recommendations that actually really had come from other parts of the commission, I started to agree with it. I talked myself into it. So it's an amazing thing. If you actually commit yourself to the work of compromise, you learn things you wouldn't otherwise learn.
Sorry to hog the questions. But the obvious question is, but as a woman of color, you would have been 0 for 2 in being left out of everything that was promised and provided. So how did you learn to love that history?
Oh, gosh. Well, you've asked me this question before. That's not fair. No, it's all right. No, so, I mean, to some extent, I already started to point to it, right? I pointed to the way in which Adams immediately, working with others in Massachusetts, including free blacks in Massachusetts like Prince Hall, drew on this language to secure the abolition of enslavement in Massachusetts. Pennsylvania, too, by 1780, right? Adams, Franklin, all right? There's a straight connection from the work they did to the Constitution. So the point is that the project of universal freedom was already engaged. It was on the table at that time. Also for women, Abigail Adams was objecting to the structure of government. So I will spend a couple of minutes on this one because it's the answer to your question. So Abigail was brilliant and very frustrated with the boys in Philadelphia in various ways. She just thought they were dragging their heels. She's like, come on already, like declare independence. What is taking you so long? She kept writing to John, encouraging them to get this done. And so John was always reporting back on what they were doing, sharing his ideas and things like that. And there was a point as they were moving towards the actual declaration that Abigail wrote to him and said, well, the principles that you're starting to articulate are all well and good, but remember the ladies. Where do women fit in them? And Adam's answer was, well, the principles here, this idea that everybody's got rights need to be protected are for everybody. But with regard to how we're going to organize the powers of government, for that we will reserve and use our, quote, his words, masculine system of power. Okay? So this is where, from my point of view, the mistake came in. So conceptually, he was using that distinction between the principles, the idea that everybody has rights, and the question of how you organize those powers. And he was saying, we can put power in the hands of some and protect the rights of all. Okay, that was his claim, that you could protect the rights of all while limiting power to some. So that's leaving Abigail out, that's leaving me out. So Abigail wrote back, and she said, husbands don't have a good track record. They abuse their power and often hold tyranny over wives. She used that word tyranny. And she said, well, we'll give you one more chance, But if things don't go better, we women will have to foment a rebellion for voice and representation. So she wrote that in 1776. That really does sort of predict what happened with the suffragettes. But from my point of view, she was doing something very profound in that moment, not just complaining practicalities. She was making a deep philosophical point. You cannot protect the rights of all without putting power in the hands of all. Power in the hands of only some will corrupt, because that's absolute power over others that corrupts. So right from the get-go, she was naming the biggest challenge. If you really care about rights for all, you're going to have to figure out how to do power sharing for all. So I have had the fortune to be able to see that the case and cause of universal freedom and equality were there from the beginning, for real. They weren't just post-Civil War additions. When Lincoln says we're going to rededicate to the proposition that all men are created equal, he's right. It's a rededication. It's not a new dedication. It really was there at the beginning. Not everybody was on board for that universal cause, for sure. Not everybody was on board, but the conversation was there. It was already alive. So that, for me, is the spark that makes it all possible. Thanks. Do we have time for one or two more? I'm not sure. One more. Okay. So I'll let somebody else pick, because I can't make that choice.
Hello.
Two more
Yeah,
then.
all right.
We'll do two.
Okay.
So I think you must have had the mic first, so we'll go here and then come over to you. Alrighty?
Okay. So I'm a international student, and I'm from somewhere where you don't necessarily get the freedom of speech and everything that you would get here.
Yep.
And I am in love with everything, the freedom and all. And I got to, my experience made me compare the two different countries and choose which one is better for the future and for everybody. And I was wondering, as somebody who is from a different country, how could I do or help? Would it be the same as somebody who's here, or?
I think you just helped. Just by saying that, just by sharing that perspective and that story. Too many of us take what we have for granted.
Totally.
And so being able to communicate what you can see, given where your origin is valuable. It's helpful. And yes, you can also pitch in the work that everybody else is pitching in, for sure. So grab hold of both of those things. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so I'll try to boil my question down a little bit because it was a little bit long. But so how would you go about convincing someone who, in their view, has never seen democracy work for them, that it could if they were sort of organized on a broader group level?
Yep.
Okay.
No, I totally get it. Thank you so much for that question. You're not alone in asking that question. And, often when folks my generation and older are saying, those kids, why don't they care about democracy? They were born after September 11th, and then there was the Great Recession of 2008, which really scarred a whole generation of people who were just getting out of college. And then we had some of the highest, most intense polarization this country's ever had, starting in about 2013 and through the 2016 election. And then we had a global pandemic, and it's what has democracy done for young people lately? Or as one person said to me after our student session this morning, I think a lot of my peers just have a sort of sense of nihilism. And I was reflecting during your remarks on why is that the case for me? And I realized, well, my life has been punctuated by school shootings, and they never seem to stop. So we don't really seem like we can actually address real problems that we have in our society. So there's real basis for people's frustration with where our democracy is. And from my point of view, we can't just, in older generations, invite younger generations into participation in something that is not responsive to urgent problems. And so for me, that's why the work of democracy renovation becomes necessary. We have to redesign our institutions so that they are responsive and accountable, at the same time that we are also reconnecting people to their own civic experience, power, and responsibility. So there's a lot of work to do, and if you want to know what does that mean about redesigning those institutions, I would refer you to the report I mentioned. It's called Our Common Purpose, Bipartisan Commission. set of recommendations like increasing the size of the House of Representatives, term limits for the Supreme Court, things that we need to do to rebuild local journalism, civic education, a whole set of different things. And those recommendations are important precisely for the reason you just articulated, because our democracy, it should be worthy of us. Right now, not sure. Thank you so much.
So I want to thank all of you for being here for this deeply informative and inspirational lecture and discussion. That was really wonderful. We're so appreciative for you being here, Professor Allen. I'm certain all of us will take much from tonight. I also want to invite all of you who want to continue celebrating Constitution Week to attend a performance of Cato, a Tragedy, which the Institute is also co-sponsoring this week. It's playing for the next until Thursday evening at University of Tennessee's Clarence Brown Lab Theater. It's open to the public and tickets are free. If you don't know what Cato Tragedy is, it's the play that George Washington had performed at Valley Forge. Rarely performed in public, so this is a remarkable opportunity. Also, next Tuesday, we're going to continue here at the Baker School in our Tuesdays in the Toyota, our ASH lecture series, and our speaker will be former ambassador of Poland to Ukraine, Kenya, and NATO, Marek Zolkowski. So if you are interested, please visit the Baker School website to view this event and any remaining events. So once again, thank you all for being here and have a great evening.